Presentation, I am going to take you through the book and also talk about the big picture of climate change adaptation that has emerged out of this book. I think first of all it is important to understand that there is climate change happening. It is impacting our natural and human system, and most importantly it is now exacerbating vulnerabilities of the poor. I think that is a big message that comes out of this book. And all the things that I have listed here is something that Indian scientists have come out in the last 20 years. Over 20th century, India has witnessed 0.7 degrees temperature rise. The last decade was the warmest decade on the record. There is significant increase in frequency, persistency, and spatial coverage of high temperature extreme events, both heat waves as well as cold waves. We have heavy rainfall events and very heavy rainfall events that is increasing. We have evidence of decrease in cereal production. We have evidence of decrease in horticulture production, as well as evidence of decrease in milk production in this country. And climate change is impacting health system as well as in this country. But something which we worked a lot in this book was actually to document extreme weather events. And we took last 2 years, 2013 and 2014. And this is a map in the book which tells you that nowadays 1,000 crore loss events are becoming common in this country. Whether it is drought, hailstorm, extreme rainfall events, cyclones. In fact, cyclone Hudhud, which happened recently in Visakhapatnam, cost a loss of close to 70,000 crore rupees. It is billed to be the most damaging extreme weather event that has hit India so far. No one is talking about it, but the numbers are as high as 70,000 crore rupees. So we are now battered by extreme weather events. If you look at the numbers for the past 2 years alone, and these losses are mounting. In fact, if you look at climate-induced losses and the research that is coming out, it says that every year India is losing anywhere between $80 to $90 billion because of climate-induced losses. Government of India has given its estimation saying that it spends about 2.5% of its GDP on adaptation. There is no estimate of how much money we are losing because of extreme weather events. Loss and damage estimates are missing. CSE has done its estimate for the past 2 years, and as I said, we think close to 10,000 people died because of extreme weather events, and there are losses of at least 1 lakh crore that has happened in the last 2 years because of extreme weather events. The future is not looking good either. ADB estimates are that 10% of GDP of India will go into adaptation by the end of the century. Recently at Lima, where Minister was there, I was also there, a new report was released, which was Adaptation Gap Report, which now says that whatever cost we had estimated for adaptation in the past was a gross underestimation. Developing world will need close to $500 billion by 2050 just for adaptation. This is the UNEP report that came out. In Lima, it also became quite clear to all of us that there's not going to be much international support for countries like India on adaptation. We are not going to get international money for adaptation. We will have to manage ourselves. And this is going to be more and more difficult in the future. It is going to be difficult primarily because we are one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. People talk about least developed countries, people talk about small island states. But India has more poor people than all the poor of all the least developing countries put together, and dependent on climate sensitive sectors. So that is the vulnerability that this country has, and we need to internalize this vulnerability. And we need to internalize simply because we are in for an additional at least 0.3 to 0.7 degrees temperature rise between 2016 and 2035. That's given. All the model run in AR5 shows that we are in for at least 0.3 to 0.7 degrees temperature rise. Now, if that is the scenario, the question we asked 2 years back was, is India prepared for climate change? And this book is about this question. Is India prepared for climate change? We have looked at National Action Plan, which we found was quite weak on adaptation. We have looked at state action plans, which are more development plan with sustainability included. There's a huge scope to further improve the quality of state action plan. But the biggest problem in the state action plan is there's no clarity on how, what, and who of implementation. We have a plan, we don't have money, we don't know who is going to implement it. We have looked at National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. And we believe it has enormous potential to reduce vulnerability by building climate resilient assets. There are problems, but this is a scheme that can be built on as far as climate change adaptation is concerned. We have looked at crop insurance and weather advisory, and we have also looked at new initiatives like National Initiative of Climate Resilient Agriculture. So there are a lot that is there, and we need to build on that. But what we also did for this book was actually to understand what is happening on the ground. And that's where we sent people across the country to document good adaptation practices as well as maladaptation practices. Let me give you a flavor of what kind of work we have done in terms of documenting good adaptation practices. We have looked at Punjab, and we have representative from Punjab, and where Punjab in 2009 came out with the Punjab Preservation of Subsoil Act, which actually is an act to reduce the depletion of groundwater. And we have a representative who is going to talk about it. We have looked at how National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme can be used and is being used to revive rivers for watershed management. We have looked at flood areas in Bihar and how small NGOs are working to provide drinking water in flood-prone areas. We have looked at payment for ecosystem services in Himachal Pradesh. We have looked at traditional multi-cropping agricultural practices in Himachal Pradesh. We have looked at how school children are being prepared for floods in Assam. In desert, we have looked at how Barmer is now getting affected by flash floods and how houses are being built for those flash floods. We have looked at traditional adaptive practice of pagaras in Rajasthan. We have looked at revival of common pasture land in Udaipur in Rajasthan. So we have looked at coast and islands, and in totality we have documented 22 case studies which we have called as good adaptation practices that needs to be replicated. I am sure there are 220 more, but this is the beginning, and we need to document good practices and disseminate this information. That's the message that comes out very, very clearly from this book. But we have also looked at how and what of adaptation, and what is the big picture that we need to look at. The first picture that emerges is that adaptation is going to make, climate change is going to make development more and more expensive. That is quite clear to us. Whether you are going to construct a dam or you are going to do a small rainwater harvesting structure, it is going to be more and more expensive because of climate variability. The second thing that emerges is that climate change will widen existing poverty traps as well as create new traps. And the new traps are going to be related to extreme weather events. The third thing that comes out is, if you don't mitigate, adaptation is not going to be sufficient. We have to start looking at beyond adaptation. And there are enough case studies in India, especially in coastal areas, where we have to start looking beyond adaptation. Now, the good news is, this country knows how to deal with climate variability. And we have done it for 6 decades. It is not a new science for India. From watershed management to agroforestry to soil moisture conservation to drought proofing to employment guarantee. The 6 decades of experience of India is going to be an asset, both good experience as well as bad experience in designing new generation of climate change adaptation plan for this country. That's the good news. The bad news is that we will have to make changes because the change is going to be uncertain. That also comes up. And therefore adaptation in this country will be about doing development better, faster, sustainably, taking into account climate variability and responses. That's the definition that emerges from this book. Faster, better, sustainable, taking into account variability and responses. So what should we do? And these are 4 or 5 points that comes out. I think the first thing this country needs to do is that we need to internalize the risk posed by climate change. There's a lot of people who believe that it's a Western conspiracy. And I want to put it out here on the table. That we need to internalize the risk posed by climate change in all levels of government and outside government. Point number 2 is, if we want adaptation to happen, we have to move from centralized decentralization that we have practiced in this country for 6 decades to effective decentralization. I think that's another thing that we have to look at. Third, whatever existing policies program we will have to mainstream adaptation in there. We don't need to create a separate silo for adaptation. That's not going to be useful. We need to have social safety nets. We need to scrutinize global policies for the poor. So if India negotiates climate change, it has to negotiate for the poor. And lastly, as this book does, we should promote, share knowledge, disseminate information, and build capacity on adaptation practices in the country. Thank you very much.